Hello. So apologies in advance because I suspect this is going to be a bit of a rambling one, as if I ever do any other kind of video on this channel. But I wanted to quickly touch on this whole thing about language and vocabulary and stuff. So one thing I've noticed a lot of my musical colleagues saying are things like, oh, that player's got a lot of language, oh, that player doesn't have much language, but they're a great improviser. Oh, I need to get some more language. Yeah, it's great when you put a bit of language in. And I'm sort of trying to figure out what language is, and I think what they mean is, essentially, as far as I can tell, basically bebop vocabulary, and the sort of things that you might get from, by transcribing a solo or by looking at a big list of bebop lines like the ones you get in the David Baker How to Play Bebop books, for example. And this is kind of often sort of expressed in contrast to, say, I better check I'm in tune actually, reasonably. In contrast to people who sort of, play perhaps, I don't know, more stuff from scales and arpeggios and so on. And I find this quite interesting. It's kind of a dichotomy. You can almost see in a lot of modern players, actually, who have a grounding in bebop but play perhaps more, modern music. Like a lot of the guys in the States at the moment, I'm thinking of people like Kurt Rosenwinkel, Gillard Hexelman, Larkelund. Yeah, I think Larkelund's got a fair amount of bebop language. I mean, he doesn't seem to be massively a language player in that sense, and I would say that Gillard Hexelman sounds a bit more like one to me. I don't know, you might disagree. But a lot of these players also seem to have a grounding in bop, and they kind of also play obviously much more modern stuff, where it's different kind of harmony. So bop lines won't work. And it's almost like there's a kind of disconnect. So they'll start to play something which is more based on chord scalar ideas, and with the very skilled improvisers like Mike Marino and people like that, they can kind of to and fro a lot between the two things. So anyway, it might seem a bit rambling, but what I want to say is that I'm sort of looking at things from a slightly different perspective, because I don't really see bebop as being something which is necessarily that much different from any other kind of music, in that it can be assembled from bits and pieces, and any kind of vocabulary can be assembled essentially from bits and pieces. And I wanted to talk quickly about the ways in which we can turn something which is very simple into something that's a bit more like language, which is heavily influenced by what I've studied, the Barry Harris system. And on the other hand, the problems that I have with things like intervallic approaches and stuff like that, and perhaps maybe some ideas on how we can kind of make that sound a little bit more like, quotes, language, unquotes. There's quite a lot to cover in one video, and I don't know if I'll be able to do it satisfactorily. But these are questions that I'm asking rather than something that I'm, kind of made up, have a mind made up about. Anyway, so for like, let's just take something out of a bebop tune, like a head. What's a good line that we can use? Because I think bebop heads are undoubtedly language. They're not just collections of scales and arpeggios, that they have a definite musical sense to them. So I would say like a really good example might be something like, any of them really. I've been working a bit on, let's take a look at something I haven't looked at that much, which will be this one. Scrapple, right? So that is kind of... So I mean, already, like in this kind of thing, a number of features in that first phrase which we can look at. So we got, so that's like a very common tetrachord in bebop, 4-note like scale run, starting on presumably G minor. So this is the 1 G, and then we go up to the 2 flat 3, but we start with an upbeat on the 7th. And then, like when we come down, we just go to a flat 7. So it's kind of like the classical notion of a melodic minor scale, in the sense that Classical players will play a melodic minor scale differently going up and down. So when we go up, we have this 7, which is like an upbeat sort of note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, it's not on that beat, is it? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3. Okay, so that's the rhythmic context of it. And that is very, very simple. And the thing that makes it, that line, that's a very, very simple phrase. I mean, that's a swing era phrase, isn't it, really? So we're really going, I suppose, from playing a sort of G minor scale to outlining D7. I mean, depending on how you look at it, you could see it as all, sorry, C7. Depending on how you look at it, you can see it's all being C7. You can see this as being related to the Lydian dominant, and then maybe the mixolydian. And then, or that could be an enclosure around the E, which is the third of the C7 chord going up to C there, right? For that sort of sixth, which is obviously a pattern that's common from the swing era. Or bluegrass or blues or any other kind of music you probably think of probably has used that boom 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 sort of thing at some point. So I mean, it's really two things, isn't it? So you've got a scalar. Okay, so I mean that's quite kind of I would say that's a bit of language. So what makes it language? Because it's just a scale going up. And for me, it's got to be the phrasing and the rhythm of it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, something you can do on different contexts. For example, if I wanted to do it on a tuning B flat, I'd obviously move the pitch up. I'm just naively moving up to the obviously the position to make it right for this key. So we're going to be on C minor now. But of course you can do it in a more sophisticated way by just staying in the same area of the neck but just changing the notes. Or then it becomes a bit of a stretch because of the tuning of the guitar. And depending how you group it, you could see it's that. I kind of see that. Probably influenced by how Galper, I see that as leading onto the beat rather than being a separate thing. So it's really hard not to rush that. Careful about the fingering. So even in that fairly simple phrase, there's quite a lot of considerations about fingering and phrasing and so forth and timing. But I think that's it. I think it's the timing really that makes it language, and it's the timing that makes it specifically bebop language, because this rhythm 1, 2, 3, 4 how would we play it if we were going to make it more of a swing thing? Da, maybe. So maybe that might be more swingy. Or maybe, because this is quite, that's quite beboppy as well. We could go, let me see. That could be, so you see I'm using essentially the same notes, but that is, if not actually a swing era thing, certainly much squarer. But if we go, that's a little bit hipper. Now that does start to sound a bit like swing era stuff. So we're starting on a different beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. But we're starting on the beat. It's quite hard to do that. So by changing around a little bit, we can give a different linguistic meaning to that. I mean, I don't know if they would tend to start on the beat. That might be a little bit, so it might be kind of more like. I mean, a classic one for me is this kind of thing. So that kind of line cliche. When Dizzy Gillespie gets hold of it, he plays this. Sorry, I'm having trouble with that today. Which is a bebop rhythm, right? So for me, that's kind of quite a big deal, and I think like we can use that when we come up with our own things. And something I've been struggling a bit with, I think, in my playing is that is kind of a rhythmic squareness to it. So, for example, I've been working a lot on these kind of things. If I go, let's take an example of a bebop scale and see how we can make that sound a bit more like language. So we're going to come down. So this is a bebop scale coming from the third, and we add in a half step between the root and the seventh, the flat seventh that is. So I mean, the classic thing you could do is go, or so we're going to go up from E into a E half diminished. We could even go, we could preface it basically with something else. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's kind of a classic kind of thing that people might play. So what I'm doing there, just to summarise, I'm starting on the upbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then going into this G minor 7th arpeggio, going down, coming down the C dominant bebop scale starting on E and then ending on E, so it's a whole octave, and then I'm playing up an E half diminished arpeggio, and then I'm resolving down a step to C. So that's already got quite a few features, but it is essentially just a collection of arpeggios and scales. So I mean, the question I suppose is this sounds a bit square to me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sounds a bit like a bit classroom. So how can we make it a bit more interesting? Well, I mean, one nice thing is to add in a triplet. 1, 2, 3, 4. So how do we do that? So yeah, we can add in a semitone at the end, and we can add in, instead of playing this straight as eighths, we can make that into an upbeat going into a triplet, which is quite a common bebop phrase. If we want to keep that in the same position on the beat, we might need to go after 1 instead of catching on the upbeat after 4. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Sorry, that's not right. It sounds quite nice though, but okay, that sounds a bit more like language. So, I mean, it's about introducing a degree of rhythmic complexity. I mean, the other thing we could do is we could, maybe kind of resolve on the offbeat, so resolving on the beat. So I could play that that first half of that phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's very on the beat, that's how Barry Harris teaches it, for example, or David. I don't know if you want to say Derek Bailey, not Derek Bailey, David Baker, entirely different. If I go, if I do that and just basically cut out that F and resolve straight onto the E, it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you need to give that a good sort of accent. 1, 2, 3, 4. You could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Or you could just get rid of the half step. That's probably a more logical way of doing it. So, and then we go. That sounds a bit more like bebop. So it's kind of sort of. I suppose in a way it's really just saying really obvious stuff, but it's kind of it's like, I think it's got to have enough interest in it. I mean, you know, you can keep changing it around. See, let's try that again. That doesn't quite work. Oh, that sounds better to me. No. Now that's nice. So that starts to become language. It's almost like magic, right? I mean, that's just me kind of running the line a little bit further and just seeing what comes out. But that's what as opposed to which is what you play if you just play that kind of language straight, and there's no there's no kind of harmonic rhythmic variation. So I think to get me out of that, especially at high tempo, like kind of when you're playing rhythm changes really fast or Cherokee or something, just trying to get out of that sort of dabba dabba yabba dabba 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 dee is actually quite hard, and you have to have this kind of stuff I think ingrained really. This sort of it's like starting phrase at 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Oh, sorry. That's better. Now, notice that I'm a little bit cavalier sometimes about the notes I use. There's lots of chromatics there and things, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That to me is a that gets a bit scaly there. So I think there's a lot of that, and certainly in bebop, but most of it's in the rhythm. And I'll just give you another example from the repertoire. If I play like I mean, if a drummer plays that, right, and same is true of most of the bebop heads, you'll recognise it. So I think enough of the identity of the music is in the rhythm that the notes are kind of secondary. And if you look at the beginning of anthropology, of course, the notes are very simple. It's just it's a triad. So, I mean, that's just like B flat triad, second position, coming down the scale, diatonically, and then a semitone below, semitone above, semitone below, into the third, which is D, and then into the fifth, which is similar, not entirely dissimilar from that kind of thing we had earlier on, different notes, but the same concept. You kind of coming under one note, one chord tone by a semitone underneath, or wrapping around, and then jumping up to the next one. Sorry, so we're going to play it in the same key that we did this one in. It would be okay. So I mean that is I mean that if in the original key, B flat. I mean that 1 flat 7 of F maybe, F7. So so the harmony is this, which is like, Lederhosen music or something. It's not exactly sophisticated. The sophistication in that phrase is all coming from the rhythm, and that is perhaps a little bit of a carefully selected example, but I just wanted to kind of point out that is still very much bebop. You wouldn't find that phrase in a swing phrase. That's it. It's really just the simplest chord tones. So going on. Sorry, pencil back there. So it's ending on like a 2/5, but it's not. It's like the 2/5 lines are kind of like. It's like the simplest notes you could think of. Maybe with a second in or something, so it's a bit like Jordan's exercise. But I mean, it's like it's so straightforward notes wise. That whole of the first section, even. That's the only interesting note, really. So, if I sing it, B flat 6. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a very common phrase we find in bop. It's going. That's a blues phrase, right? It's like flat 5 going to 4, and then jumping to the flat 6 of the key. So I mean that kind of. So it hits that E flat minor chord there. So I mean, my basic point is that most of this is essentially a few diatonic notes, a few chromatic wraparounds, and loads of triadic chord tones. It's not even like there's anything on the upper extensions, but it's still bebop. So what makes it a language? Well, it's got to be the rhythm, right? Okay. Now here's the thing. The thing about this language is that, as you can see when I'm playing, if I go ba-doo ba ba ba-doo, 2, 3, 4, or if I'm going to resolve to the tonic chord, but I'm going there's a kind of intuitive connection there. That's a bit boring. Ba-doo ba ba ba-doo. It's kind of an intuitive connection. Because I'm, you know, if I do another phrase, let's see, ba-doo ba ba ba-doo. Yeah, same rhythm. Sorry. D. Yeah, so it's got a. So for some reason I need to put your or maybe, you know, however I do it, there's kind of an intuitive connection, even though I don't necessarily get it exactly right first time. That's what I've been working on. There's an intuitive connection between where I put my half steps and where I put the chord tones, or where I put the scale tones and everything else. It's you know, something that you drill if you practice out of note scales and, you know, wraparounds and things like that. If I go he is going to pick out that D because it's in the chord, right? Those strong notes are going to be chord tones, right? You know, and there's kind of way, you know, if I play that kind of not all of those notes are equal, right? And the problem with chord scale theory, and why I find it quite hard to apply, is that actually I quite like that. I mean, all the notes are kind of equal. Oh, this B flat, sort of sharp 11th chord. So I think you have to be almost more kind of ba-ba-dood and dee, ba-ba-dood and dee. You have to be more conscious of the rhythm, because you can't just expect the line to sort of create the rhythm for you at all. So, you know, if I'm playing any kind of modal vamp, I mean, you can play bebop lines like that, and that would sound a bit George Benson-y or whatever, because that's kind of what he does on a vamp. But, you know, if you want to play more of that kind of intervallic modal concept, you know, something like... Not very good at that. You have to be really careful that the temperature of the music doesn't come right down from when I'm going. When I'm playing like my bebop language. Now you might say that's just I'm not good at sort of the modal stuff, but I did learn like modes before I learned bop. And I have to say, I think that it's built in. I think bop language has this kind of ebb and flow, this kind of and that's why it's language, right? Because language has strong stresses and, well, there's stresses and it has weak words. So, for example, the way English people speak, the way I speak, I tend to emphasise the words that I want to be heard. I tend to throw away the other ones. I mean, it's not necessarily how American people speak, and obviously jazz is closer to American speech, or African American speech in particular. But it, you know, it has a bump and it has an ebb and a flow and a bounciness to it. And if every word is just the same importance, if like there's no like proper names, there's no nouns, there's no verbs, because the chord tones are like they're like the important words. So if I say something in a sentence, you know, there's going to be important words. So say something, sentence, say something, sentence, important words, you know? And then everything else is like just the chromatics joining everything up together. So that's one way to think about it. You've got the important words, and then you want all these little things that could just be like, just noises like this, which is the way English people talk, right? So yeah, it is like a language. And I think maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem with these sorts of, you know, kind of... I mean, that doesn't have a rhythm, boom, bam, bam, you know. There's a rhythm that I'm putting onto it. I mean, Barry Harris actually references this. He says like scalar stuff is much more rhythmically constricting than intervallic stuff. So maybe if your rhythmic sense is strong enough, you don't need that kind of built-in ebb and flow. You know, I would say on the whole, modal lines to me, even like the top people playing modal lines, sound like it has less forward motion than bebop. So how can we deal with that? How can we make it a bit more rhythmic? And obviously, aside from just like having really strong rhythm all the time, it might be to mix it up with a bit of bop as well. You know, just to kind of, you know, just kind of get this kind of effect. Better, right? Let me try that again. I find it really hard to do. I mean, that's hard to play that fourth stuff anyway, but I mean, technique aside, and just, you know, getting used to that way of playing, which I wouldn't say that is necessarily my forte yet. Just getting a rhythmic ebb and flow is really tough, because it's quite, you know, like I say, in bop lines, it's kind of built in, you know, how many enclosures you use to get into a chord tone, or, you know, how you add notes into the scale will affect radically the way the kind of the phrase works. So anyway, that's something to think about, and I think like trying to get that together, I think, is a really a really big part of it, and that's what makes it the language. Basically, that's what makes that stuff language. Is that phrasing aspect of it. Otherwise, it's just scales and arpeggios, and you might as well be playing exercises. And it's trying to inject that into everything I play at the moment, which is it's proving a bit of a project. But I think if I get that, then when I hear myself do it, I'm like, yes, that's the sound I want. And when I don't, I think, oh, that's a bit boring. It's like being beaten around the face with a wet kipper. Anyway, as always, leave comments below, and feel free to subscribe to my rambling YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed that and found that food for thought. Bye.